Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for today's FIBERTalk webinar. I am Rusafi Alam here with you. I hope everyone is doing fine along with your family. Today, our webinar topic is COVID World Fiber Broadband and Fiber Optics Market Updates in Asia Pacific. So in this webinar, we will discuss the state of fiber broadband in Asia Pacific and the market updates of fiber optics industry in APAC region to find out how the telecoms are growing and how the fiber optics industry is coping with the challenges posed in pre-COVID time. So two gentlemen have joined me today as a speaker. First one is Roland Montagna from iDate DG World, and another guest speaker is from CRU, Mr. Michael Finch. So we will start by Roland's presentation. So his presentation will be on basically state of fiber broadband in Asia Pacific in COVID world. Regarding Roland Montagna's bio, he is the principal analyst of broadband and FTTX at iDate DG World. iDate DG World is one of the Europe's foremost ICT experts specializing in telecom, media, and internet markets and in digital regional development. Roland has long expertise on global broadband and FTTX market. So without much ado, I will hand over to Roland for his presentation. Please welcome Roland.
Thank you, Rusafi. Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a true pleasure for me to present this World FTTX market update with a focus on APAC region. I will start by a quick view of what's happening worldwide in terms of FTTX. FTTX technology for us is the sum of three platforms of very high-speed broadband, FTTH, FTTB, fiber to the node plus VDSL, and also cable world with DOCSIS 3.x. We see that super-fast technology represents nearly 80% of the global broadband access subscription in the world in last June. This is 16 points more than 4 years ago. In this three very high-speed platform, we see that FTTHB is representing 76% of market share compared to DOCSIS 14% and VDSL 10%. In terms of growth for those technologies, especially VDSL and FTTH, we see that up to 2024, we should have a platform in terms of growth for VDSL this year. And talking about fiber, the growth should continue up to 2024, despite a weaker growth in the years to come. It's also interesting to see first the total of these FTTX subscribers worldwide, 874 million FTTX subscribers. But it's interesting to see in terms of the different platforms where it's happening. In June 2020, first, we counted more than 663 million FTTH, FTTB subscribers. You see that 80% of those subscribers are in APAC region today. Europe is representing 12% of this total. If we look about VDSL, little bit less than 90 million subscribers, we see here that Europe is representing 77% of the total because of huge deployment in such countries like the UK or Germany. But APAC is representing 21% also, and we will see where VDSL is happening also in APAC region. And concerning VDSL, well, North America, because of the historic deployment of a player like AT&T, is representing 15%. If we look at cable guides and DOCSIS 3.x, because even if 3.1 is deployed today, some players are also engaged in DOCSIS 4.0. 122 million subscriber here. North America, because of the huge cable guys, we will see where it's happening, is representing 60% of the global market share, and Europe, because of the Benelux deployment, is representing 27%. It's interesting to see also worldwide where it's happening in terms of players. First, if we look here, are the three platforms. Well, we see that the APAC region is playing a leading role. Indeed, we have here 6 ASEAN-based players and 3 US players in the global 10, followed by 1 Russian player. We have the top 3 China-based telco. We have the historic one, like in Japan and in Korea, and then we have the cable guys being there, also the big one in the US like Charter or Comcast. It's even more clear the leadership of Asia Pacific in terms of players when we concentrate in FTTH, FTTB. Here we have 7 ASEAN telco among the world 10 FTTH subscribers. And it's really interesting to see now that the world leader in terms of FTTH rollout is China Mobile. That was a pure mobile operator 10 years ago, being #1 in front of China Telecom, #2, and China Unicom, #3. We see also a category in the US we call US municipality and small ISP, close to 9.5 million, and Verizon. And we have also to add 2 other players in terms not of domestic market, but in terms of total FTTH subscribers. It's a player like Orange, present in France, Spain, and Africa, close to 8 million subscribers, and Telefonica, because of their deployment, of course, in Spain, but also in several countries in the LATAM region, and close to 9 million. So this was a global overview and positioning also Asia Pacific as a leading region in the global worldwide situation. And I will now more focus on the situation in the Asia Pacific region in terms of FTTX market. Well, we have to say that major Asian countries are moving forward FTTH deployment since several years now. We have here the million FTTX subscribers coming from pioneers country like Japan, more than 40 million, like South Korea, more than 17 million. We have the clear leadership in terms of volume, of course, coming from China, more than 445 million. And we have newcomers in terms of volume, like Vietnam, today being close to 15 million FTTX subscribers. You see also that we have some competition, but quite low, I would say, in front of fiber in those 4 leading countries being shown here. Fiber is really the norm in Asia Pacific. Nevertheless, we have positioned here in this little diagram the other technology. Blue, as you see, is dominant, and we are talking here in FTTH, FTTB. We have some VDSL rollout happening in countries such as Thailand, Philippines, but also in New Zealand, India, and of course up to now in Australia. DOCSIS also is present in some countries. Japan is a good example, and also Australia. But most of the time, you see that the main technology in Asia Pacific is FTTH, FTTB, and you can see here the growth being quite dynamic in terms of variation for FTTX players in countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, Australia. Talking about FTTX, of course, India, even if the volume of market can be different from one country to another. If we concentrate here in terms of home passed up to June last year, first, of course, we have to point it out that China represents more than 72% of FTTHB homes passed in Asia Pacific, topping more than 450 million home passed last June. On the right side of the slide, you see the 5 fastest growing market in terms of growth. India is growing fast, but again, the volume is quite low compared to other giants like Indonesia or Japan, for example. We see also growth happening in French Polynesia, in Indonesia, in Thailand, or in Malaysia. And you see here the market in terms of volume, a part of China are more in the camp of Japan, more than 50 million, Indonesia, close to 30 million, Vietnam, South Korea, India, Thailand, Taiwan, and Philippines, and Malaysia, I would say. The 3 main markets in terms of subscribers and home passed, and in terms of growth, are first, of course, I repeat myself, but in China, you see here the growth in terms of home passed. There's still a growth, quite small, but representing a volume of 27 million more home passed. This is not anecdotic. A growth of 10% in terms of subs also in 1 year. South Korea, still a growth in terms of small growth in terms of subscribers, and Japan with also a small growth in terms of subscribers and anecdotic growth in terms of home passed. Now, these mature countries are really shifting to the next generation of PON. 10G PON has been already deployed in China or in South Korea and Japan, and today the migration will go to the next generation PON, with solution arriving with 25G PON or even 50G PON also being on the table. It's also interesting to see the commercial adoption and what's the success in terms of take-up rate. The take-up rate here is measuring the ratio on subscribers, FTTH subscribers on total home passed. You see here the different situations. Well, there is, in terms of fiber, really clear adoption success in countries such as China, 95%, South Korea, Hong Kong, Australia also, or New Zealand are close to 80%. The historic market like Japan is close to 64%. And then Singapore also, of course. There are still place for growth in terms of commercial adoption in countries such as India or Thailand or even Philippines, because there is some competition also with other platforms. We didn't measure here again the impact of COVID in this report, but we can see in different zones of the world, COVID having a strong influence in terms of fiber adoption in the year 2020. This growth has been, this surge of growth has been quite clear more clear maybe in Europe, when the lockout was clearly strong, with a growth in terms of FTTH adoption of more than 10%. But also in other parts of the world, especially in Asia Pacific, this surge of growth should be also around 8 or 9%. So we will see in 2020 a clear impact of fiber adoption because of the attitude of the workers with teleworking, teleeducation, and all the online application rising during this pandemic period. We also tracking here what's happening in terms of technology. FTTH and FTTB is deployed in the APAC region. Despite we see a clear leadership in terms of fiber to the home, 94% is being deployed in fiber to the home, and in many countries where fiber was stopping at the basement of the building is now rising up to the homes. PON is clearly the technology chosen today in the region. I was talking about the deployment of 10G PON and the next GPON technology arriving. PON is representing 97 of the subscription of the homes passed, sorry, in the zone. We know also that some countries in APAC tends to have a highly concentrated population living in MDUs, and that's why today it's majoritarily MDUs being passed. 82% of homes are passed inside the MDUs compared to 18% in terms of single dwelling unit. Here are the forecast for the Asia Pacific up to 2024. We are saying that the most densely populated countries such as India, China, Bangladesh, and other countries in Southeast Asia will drive the growth of fiber market in Asia Pacific. We estimate here in 5 years the growth in terms of subscribers will increase by 23% to reach around 631 million subscribers in the region. And in terms of rollout, the growth will be higher, 27%, bringing the total fiber-ready homes up to 790 million by 2024. So what are the key trends identified in the Asia Pacific region? It's still that the fiber upgrade is ongoing in the Asia Pacific. We remember around 560 million FTTX subscribers in the APAC region. We see a strong increase in countries in terms of home pass, more than 20% in Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Laos. And even if mature markets are there, other regions should take the relay. There is an impact of government-backed fiber initiative. We see in the region also public-private initiative going on, and this should accelerate fiber rollout. We see increasing government involvement also to create incentive for players, being subsidies or pushing for open access network. This is happening in countries such as Bangladesh with Digital Bangladesh or National Fiber Research Plan in Malaysia, and we have other examples. These government initiatives should accelerate in the region to see a future of growth. We also see operators really focusing today more in fiber adoption with new services taking advantage of bandwidth and short latency being proposed in very mature markets such as Japan, South Korea, or Taiwan. And also we see in other countries when there is some competition with other technology, telcos being more and more convinced, especially with the COVID pandemic, that fiber is a good technology for the years to come, and this is clearly visible in some markets in Asia Pacific. I will conclude my presentation on the last part talking about where is the growth worldwide. At EDAT, we see two categories where it should happen in the short term. And I must here start by the example of Australia NBN. We know that up to now, the NBN and the government strategy in Australia was both more focused on the fiber to the node. But recently, in October 2020, the government announced investment of $2.3 billion US to migrate up to 2023 half of the FTTN base. So this should represent more or less a potential of 6 million FTTH ports to be deployed up to 2023 in Australia. There is a short-term growth also happening in Europe. We know that the main potential market for the years to come will be Germany and the UK, where up to now it was more VDSL and DOCSIS being deployed. Italy also is there's still a way to go in terms of FTTH rollout with the open access model being deployed in this country. We can measure that UK, Germany, Poland plus Italy should represent a reservoir of 88 million homes not passed today. The MENA region is also a candidate for short-term growth. Egypt is today starting FTTH rollout, and there are still plenty of place for growth in KSA in Saudi with massive new city project. LATAM is also in this category, having a very segmented market in Brazil and still a presence of large pan-regional telco in Mexico, Argentina, and even in all the region with players such as Telmex, Claro, or Telefonica Vivo. In the long-term period, Asia Pacific is of course the clear candidate. We have the huge potential of Southeast Asia and countries such as India, but also Bangladesh, Vietnam, Pakistan, Cambodia, or Laos. There is still here 1 billion of people living in this zone of the world, and for sure this will be a huge potential for the region. And we have also to mention Sub-Saharan Africa, where fiber is starting, not massive at the moment, but we know that fiber rollout are starting in Africa in up to 17 countries today. So it was my pleasure to present those insights to you, and just to remind that EDAT Market Intelligence, and especially the collection FTTX and Gigabit Society report is available. We are tracking FTTX platform worldwide with a huge world FTTX market data set covering more than 80 countries worldwide, and regular also reports are published talking on different thematics close to FTTX and FTTH market, like fiber for enterprise, or FTTH, or open access, or next generation PON. So don't hesitate, of course, to contact me if you want to know more about our research. I will be open to your question, and I give you the mic here to Rosafi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland. It was a nice overview about APAC. It was a packed presentation. Thank you again. So to the audience, we will take your questions for our Q&A session. You can just type those in the questions panel. If you have any queries or questions, we will have a separate combined Q&A session at the conclusion of the session. So we will discuss as many as questions we can. So we will now move to Michael's presentation. So I'm giving Michael access.
Thanks, Rusafi.
Yeah, so Michael, regarding Michael, just a few words. Michael Finch, he is leading research and development of CRU's wire and cable portfolio. About CRU delivers independent market analysis on a comprehensive range of global commodities. Its reputation with customers across fiber optics, mining, metals, and fertilizers is for integrity, reliability, independence, and authority. So Michael is working across both metallic wire and cable and fiber optics, current editor of both CRU's optical fiber and cable monitor and telecom cables market outlook, which provides all encompassing view of the global fiber optic industry. So we will now move on to his presentation. Please welcome Michael.
Thanks very much, Rusafi. Yeah, so today I want to provide an update on sort of fiber demand, essentially, or cable demand within the APAC region. It builds nicely on Roland's presentation. We talked a lot about, the potential for growth in those markets. Obviously, some disruptions in 2020 due to COVID, but I like to look ahead to the potential that we see in the markets here and the importance of the market. So, yep, good morning, good afternoon, and I hope you'll have a good session here and look forward to your questions after. In terms of contents then, I do want to take a look at 2020. Obviously, the disruptions that we've seen across the market, some of the more negative, should we say, news stories. But then I want to change pace and take a look at current sentiment. So what is the market seeing right now in April, in May, in the quarter ahead? And then take a more longer term view for the APAC region. So where are the potential for demand? Where are the prospects? How has this changed since COVID-19? What are the opportunities? And then finish with, similar to Roland, just a quick message about the rest of the world to help frame the growth that we're seeing for the APAC region in a global stage. So with that, just want to talk very quickly about 2020. So we see on the chart on the left-hand side, we have CRU's view here for optical cable consumption, and that's shown in million fiber kilometers. And we can see clearly we've got the key regions broken out to build up the total number. In 2018, surpassing 500 million fiber kilometers deployed worldwide in cable, which is fantastic. But of course, we've seen the pullback in 2019 and naturally 2020. So it's a very tough year for many regions for slightly different reasons. So in China, it was a relatively flat year. Heavily disrupted in perhaps say Q1 2020, April 2020, but then recovered relatively quickly in line with a swift COVID-19 containment, and deployments resumed in the second half of the year. In terms of Europe, especially Western Europe, really struggled throughout the first half of 2020 as a lot of a lack of skilled labor availability, which is directly due to the pandemic itself in terms of the lockdowns and restrictions, which really impacted cable deployments last year. There was a pickup in the second half of the year, but not enough to offset the weakness we experienced in the first half. Now, in terms of the APAC region, a relatively mixed bag. We've seen some sharp pullbacks in South Korea, India. Naturally, we'll talk about that in a separate slide in due course. And then the more mature markets, perhaps of Japan and Taiwan, relatively stable despite the challenges. Looking to the chart on the right-hand side then, and putting that all together to get a year-on-year percentage change, a growth factor for global optical cable demand. We can see the view here from CRU Clearly, we're delineating 4 key areas to this chart, ranging from 2014 to 2024. So we've got a period we call market equilibrium. This is when we had supply and demand relatively, really well balanced actually. We saw exceptionally high growth rates, a lot of that driven by some of the rollouts in China. We had the period of fiber shortage. We all know about this, obviously, when we saw capacity and demand really close. Some facilities operating at or above 100% utilization. Prices were exceptionally high, very profitable period for many players in the industry. Now we moved into the industry reset, and obviously lately coined COVID-19 as well. We had that sharp pullback in 2019 on a global basis, predominantly driven by the weakness in China experienced in 2019. In 2020, of course, weakness compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, and again, just relating to restrictions, disruptions to both supply, but mostly on the demand side, again, limiting the amount of cable that we could deploy. But then we look ahead, and the recovery this year, gradual, slow, but healthy growth forecast over the coming years as we move into a ubiquitous fiber era. So we talked about demand. 2 of the other key sort of talking points that we need to mention are, of course, overcapacity and inventory. Now, this is not just a talking point last year, but in prior years as well. And we can see the chart on the left-hand side, which shows the global view for preform capacity additions. So we're looking at year-on-year percentage change here versus fiber demand in yellow. 2016, 2017, even 2018, we had exceptionally high preform capacity growth, but it was around that 2018, 2019 period that we did see a divergence in terms of fiber demand compared to preform capacity. Fiber demand in line with cable demand, of course, fell back sharply for the reasons we previously mentioned. But preform capacity, due to earlier planned investments in ongoing constructions, continued to increase for some years. So we did have a big widening, a gap in terms of the available capacity, or excess capacity, we should call it. And this did lead to some buildup of inventories in certain countries, but mostly we're talking about in China here, and where CRU have most accurately assessed their inventories is on the bare fiber side in China. And that is to say, at the end of 2019, CRU estimated bare fiber inventories in China stood at around 24 million fiber kilometers, so exceptionally high levels. We'll talk about how that inventory has changed over time in a few slides. But the most important thing here is, whilst you have excess capacity, you've got available inventory and excessive inventory in the supply chain, especially in a market like China, who's a price setter. And then we've got weakened demand compounded by COVID-19 pandemic. Naturally, we did see a big pullback in prices last year. So not only do we see the sharp declines in 2019, but also in 2020, CRU estimate average G652D bare fiber spot prices in China fell down to around about the $2.90 $90 level ex VAT last year. So where we believe into loss-making territory, and those prices have continued to sort of slip from that level or hover around certainly the below $3 level, so exceptionally low right now. And of course, impacting profitability not just in China, but that low price level has fed into other markets globally. So subsequently, piecing all this together and looking at the 2020 market in terms of on a value basis. So this chart here shows optical cable production by fiber type in US billion dollars. We can see where the big yellow arrow is pointing downwards, of course, the market in 2020 falling below or at or near 2015 levels. So to really low levels, around 10 billion US dollars. And of course, the gains that we saw in 16, 17, 18 very quickly being eroded. Now, much of that weakness or contraction in market value came from G652 types. That's where we saw the biggest price declines, of course, and the greatest excess capacity. Looking ahead to this year, we do expect market value to return to growth and increase on compared to last year, mostly because we're seeing an improvement in demand, but some marginal price gains, which we'll talk about shortly. So with the sort of review of 2020 done, I want to take a look at where the market is right now. So what's the current sentiment in the market? What are people seeing? Where are the fast growing areas? And what are the metrics that are leading to that fast growth? So for me, there's no better way of looking at the current sentiment than CRU's recently launched Fiber Optic Cable Index, or CRU FOCI, as I like to call it. So some of the members on the call here may be familiar with this service that we have added to our reports. And essentially what it is, it's a monthly confidence survey. This gets emailed out on the first working day of every month. So I'm actually due to send the email to members shortly. And this goes out to around about 50 unique companies operating throughout the value chain, the fiber optic cable value chain, so raw material suppliers through to cable producers themselves. And we believe, in terms of the companies that participate on a regular basis, we believe it covers over around 85% of global optical cable production, so really quite extensive in its reach. We wanted to provide an industry benchmark. We wanted to increase transparency for the market, so we can clearly see where the fast growth areas are and how the markets have developed over time on a monthly, so a high frequency basis. This is built up, this survey, this sentiment survey is built up based on 6 key questions. So we're looking at sales orders, prices, inventory, production, lead times, and employment. And simply put, the question asks, how have these metrics changed since the prior month? So when we piece this all together and look at the global FOCI value, which is the chart shown here, we can see how the market has moved over time since launching in September. Now, comparing that, these bar and these numbers to the 100 level, which is our midpoint, that is to say anything over 100 means a growing market, expanding market, vice versa. Anything below 100 means the market is contracted or weakened versus the prior month. So if we take a look at the chart, clearly we can see there's been a turn in the market, an improvement since around the start of the year, around the December, January time. Moving into February and March, we've seen continuous growth in the market at an increasing pace as well. Looking at the April value, 119.4, and remember this is on a global basis, built up of an average of 5 key regions, which we'll take a look at in a second. We can see, of course, the market is still expanding as we moved into April. The value is down slightly on March. That's not a negative. That's not necessarily to say, of course, the market isn't weakened since March. In fact, it's still growing, so it's improving versus March, but just at a slower pace. That's what we need to remember here. But nevertheless, we've seen a really strong improvement in the markets, in the crew FOCI, which I believe and I hope relates to all your businesses, and you'll agree with this as well. Now we can break out that global value into our 5 key regions here. So these are the building blocks for that global number. So Europe, China, APAC ex-China in yellow, North America, and South America. Now North America for some time has led the way in terms of market strength and improvement, consistently growing ever since we've launched this cable index back in September. Now we're seeing China improving recently, easing slightly as we moved into April, but nothing to worry about. And again, this is tying directly into direct market intelligence that we get from our colleagues and market contacts in China. And then we can see the April ex-China number, which is shown in sort of that yellow gold color. We've seen significant improvement over the last couple of months, in fact, reaching a high in April. Now, we believe a lot of this strength was actually in relation to the improvements we've seen in February, March time and early April in India. We've seen some price increases in India. However, of course, big downside risks to this view, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that number drop slightly as we moved into May, of course, with the recent developments and sort of the resurgence in COVID-19 cases in India. So yeah, there are expectations that could ease back, but nevertheless, all key regions are growing strongly since around about the February time. So that's great to see in the market, and certainly it's relating to the feedback we get as well. Again, we can break down that data even further. So looking specifically at China, and this is the April number for both China and APAC ex-China on the right-hand side. And here we can see the 6 key metrics which make up that April number, essentially for both China or APAC ex-China. So for China, of course, we've seen in April an improvement on all of these key metrics versus March, apart from employment. That is to say, over the course of April, or when we conducted the survey in early April, there were expectations that there would be some people being let go or some firing happening in the industry compared to March, and lower numbers compared to March. In APAC ex-China, all key metrics are performing very well. Notable or standout improvement in sales orders and prices, so really strong number here, figure. Of course, that price figure probably relating to a lot of strength that we've seen recently in India. And again, a word of caution about how that may change over the coming month. So as I mentioned, I am due to send out the next available email. So if anyone would like to participate in this survey, it is open to anyone. It's not just CRU subscribers. Anyone that does participate will get to see this sort of extra level of detail. So if you are interested, of course, just let me know. Shifting on to the view for APAC ex-China, I want to start here with China itself, of course, we all know that one of the biggest markets, the biggest market, and tends to be a driving force behind regional growth patterns and indeed pricing. So of course, we mentioned a lot about bare fiber inventory earlier in the presentation. Now, I'm pleased to report that we've certainly seen an improvement in this inventory position. So as mentioned, we saw end 2019 started 2020 bare fiber inventory in China at or around the 24 million fiber kilometer level. There's a chance this was a lot higher. Some market participants reporting indeed it was. However, we settled at the estimate of 24 million fiber kilometers. Now, we did see considerable drawdown of inventory throughout 2020. Some in the first half of the year when we had some closures around the Wuhan and Hubei province. But then we saw, continued drawdown as we progressed throughout the second half of the year. A lot of this material, bare fiber, being utilized in the China Mobile tender, so subsequently cabled and put out to China Mobile to satisfy that tender. And again, it's part of the reason why we saw such aggressive bidding prices for that tender and such a pullback in pricing, because there's available inventory to put into that tender. Now, as we progress throughout the first quarter of the year, again, some continued drawdown, some of that volume heading into the China Telecom tender, and we believe probably at or around about this point in time, to April, May, all of that inventory could now be fully utilized. And in the situation in China is that we're back to a healthy, balanced inventory position. That's not to say there's completely bare shelves to say in warehouses, but it's a healthy, natural inventory position. So we're not talking excessive stock here. And like I said, some market participants actually reported that could have been the case as early as NQ1 2020. So what does this mean for the market? Well, it's certainly a positive driver. It means demand is in the cable, the monthly deployment rates are progressing well, and also it provides a surer footing for any price increases throughout the remaining part of the year, especially over the coming months. So we're in a much better position here, a much better balanced market in China. And indeed, this is backed up by our direct assessment of G652D bare fiber prices. So we can see in the small chart here, the view for China and Europe. So we started estimating and assessing that bare fiber prices in China started to bottom out in between sort of January, February, March time. Europe still had a little bit of room to drop over that time frame, but nevertheless, as we finish our assessment in March, yet to do our assessment in April, but we are confident, April and May, we are confident that we will see some price increases. And in fact, we now hopefully have reached the bottom, and with inventory in China being in a much better position, demand starting to pick up, we are expecting some price increases, albeit marginal, over the coming months. Now, if we take a look at some of the other key metrics in China, we can see here, obviously, you see the price view in yellow clearly stand out. We can see the marginal increases we're expecting for 2021 as a whole when we look at the average year-on-year change. But we can see the other key metrics, cable demand, cable production, and fiber production, all set to increase this year. One of the days perhaps of double-digit growth levels, but nevertheless, we're coming off the back of 2 pretty weak years. So it's great to see demand up again in the region of 3, 4, 5% perhaps, albeit dependent on when we see the China Mobile tender, and of course what level that will be at. And fiber production growing again. Obviously, there was a mismatch in fiber production versus cable demand due to the inventory build, and that's starting to flatten out. Now, in terms of India, we mentioned the challenges it faced. 2019 was exceptionally weak for India for a number of reasons, mostly relating to perhaps overhanging debt and some of the issues that the carriers faced there, delays to the Baronet scheme. However, in 2020, unfortunately, there wasn't much change here. Whilst we started to resolve the AGR ruling and overhanging debt and look at delayed payment schemes, we did obviously see a significant outbreak of COVID-19, and that impacted supply to some extent, but mostly demand. So again, a sharp pullback in the position for India there. We actually assessed an 18.3% contraction in optical cable demand in India last year compared to 2019, which dragged down, of course, the non-China APAC total, which India is a part of. We see the weakness in South Korea last year as well, and as mentioned, Japan, Taiwan, relatively stable. Now, the purpose of this chart is to not necessarily look at the issues last year, but to look ahead and look at the potential for growth in these markets, particularly in India. So I want to draw your attention to the chart in the bottom left-hand side here. Now, what this shows here is our view for cumulative fiber installed on a per capita basis. That is to say, take up all the fiber that CRU have assessed that is put in the ground in these countries on a global basis, and compare that to, of course, the number of people within that country. We can see the global average shown in dark blue for the world. In 2019, that was around 0.6 fiber kilometers installed in the ground per person. Of course, we can see China, a huge leader in this sense, more in the region of 1.5 fiber kilometers per person that's deployed in the ground. That's naturally due to their very fiber intensive sort of mobile build out 4G, but also of course, as Roland pointed out, you know, how well they've done in terms of rolling out FTTH2. You know, that's virtually complete now, that build. So incredibly fiber dense country on that sense. But compare this to India, look at 2019, where are we? Sort of 0.2, 0.1 fiber kilometers per person. So a huge scope for growth in India there, even just to get up to the world average, and a lot of fiber that's left to be put into the ground. And that's where the focus is over the coming years. So, you know, now we are more optimistic moving forwards, apart from, of course, the current disruptions and the downside risk that the market may see in 2021. Looking ahead to 2022 out to 2025, the end of the forecast period, for India, there is huge scope for growth. So we are seeing, you know, those delayed payment schemes, we're seeing increasing ARPUs. We've now got the spectrum auction and a timeline in place for that. We've seen a pickup in both public and private funding, the restart of the BharatNet scheme, which getting the immediate disruptions, which I do hope get under wraps and resolve as quickly as possible. You know, the future is bright in India. And we can see that on the chart on the right-hand side, which shows our midterm view for compound annual growth in optical cable demand. Now, that, of course, there is a base effect exaggerating growth in India, but nevertheless, it certainly will be a leader in this region. Other growth areas, Indonesia and Thailand, looking particularly strong over the midterm as well. However, a note on supply. Now, I've mentioned, of course, the issues we've previously seen. The chart on the left-hand side again shows preform capacity and fiber demand, but I've overlaid the global average for G65D prices, and we can see just as we saw a widening in the gap between the two there, coming out of the period of shortage, we saw a massive pullback in global average prices. And with preform capacity, you know, plateauing now, and you know, limited scope for growth, perhaps due to the current market conditions over the coming years. But nevertheless, even if fiber demand were to, you know, beat CLU expectations here by some way, we're still going to have a huge overhanging amount of excess capacity, which is going to act as a brake or a ceiling for further price increases. On a global basis, I should add most of the excess capacity we see on the chart on the left-hand side pertains to China, but it's also the case that we see excess capacity in different countries, just on perhaps a smaller scale. The chart on the right-hand side shows a view for Indian excessive draw capacity. So the sort of the yellow chart there, which is a mismatch between installed draw capacity versus domestic fiber demand. And again, you know, excessive buildup of capacity here, just as expansions came on stream. Unfortunately, it came at a time of weakened demand and naturally the COVID-19 pandemic, which no one could have forecast. So it's just a note here to say that, you know, it will act as a ceiling for price increases, but I do hope that we can get back to a more profitable point in the industry. Lastly, one or two slides on rest of the world, just to help frame that for the APAC region. For Europe, we see in the dark blue bars on the chart on the left-hand side. Again, this is optical cable demand. We see the weakness that, you know, COVID-19 caused the markets, especially in Italy and France, where some of the disruptions or lockdowns were most significant, and where we saw a huge lack of skilled labour availability, directly due to COVID-19, although some of that was ongoing from the prior years. But nevertheless, we're looking at a strong rebound in Europe, and there is, you know, optimism or expectations. The numbers in yellow could actually inch a little bit higher as the year progresses. We've seen a big pickup in demand deployments, you know, going ahead at full steam. You know, the shift in network architecture in UK and Germany, of course, the reason behind some of the faster growth rates that we see there. As Roland pointed out, a lot of growth in those markets. We've seen increased focus in general across Europe, but many different markets, including APAC, on our fixed line networks. So shoring up the FTTH offering or super fast broadband access offering, and a lot of that being obviously fiber related. Now in the US, this was one of the markets which actually grew last year and grew by a lot, near 10%. And the midterm outlook for the US is strong. We've seen a number of stimulus measures, you know, namely the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, which will kick in the second half of this year, but also, you know, the American Jobs Plan, where we've got, you know, more money being dedicated to looking at rural connectivity and broadband access as well. So a strong midterm outlook for Europe, for the US as well. Now, piecing that together and looking at the chart on the left-hand side, which shows again a compound annual growth view for the market over the 2020 to 2025 era or period, we see, you know, the global total in yellow at around 5%. So Yes, lower than we've seen over prior decades, gone perhaps are the days of double-digit growth, but it is at a healthy and perhaps more sustainable level. We see some variations in the key regions here, but notably the other APAC region representing the highest potential for growth over that midterm period. We've seen India, we talked about that, huge potential for growth, but other markets, Indonesia, Vietnam to some extent. So there's a lot left to do in APAC. Now, piecing that together, looking at it from an absolute basis, so in terms of million fiber kilometers in the chart on the right-hand side, the market in 2020 versus annual deployments that we see in 2025, what are the growth engines here? And again, it's China shown in yellow, so maybe slower growth rates, but on an absolute, a true volume basis, huge contributor of growth over that period. And of course, other APAC as well, shown in light blue. So to review quickly, or to conclude, yes, 2019, the pandemic did impact deployments worldwide, the exception being perhaps the US, where deployments continued pretty much unabated by COVID-19. It was a period, which can be summarized as weak demand, excess capacity and inventory buildup or drawdown, and nevertheless weakened prices. In terms of current sentiment, Cruise Fiber Optic Cable Index does point to an improving market since the turn of the year, APAC ex-China recording their highest level in April. The outlook then was certainly underway in terms of our recovery. Huge opportunities for increased FTTX related demand, especially in the post-pandemic era. We see downside risks from COVID-19 in future outbreaks or ongoing issues, especially so in India. But beyond sort of 2021, we are hopeful. And with that under wraps, we see continuous growth in those markets. And in terms of the rest of the world, bounce back in Europe, and as mentioned, the outlook for the US is looking particularly strong. Now, just a note from me to say, all of what I presented to today is drawn from our fiber optic services, in particular the telecom cables market outlook, which provides CRU's view for optical cable demand, supply, pricing over a 5-year period. So if that is of interest, please do get in touch with myself. And a note, lastly, to say that we are running our annual Wire and Cable conference on May 18th to May 20th. This will be virtual again, following a very successful conference in 2020. So I've included a link there. So if anyone was or is interested in attending that, they can just follow the link and register as you normally would. So thanks very much for listening. I'm looking forward to answering any questions you may have. Thanks, Rusafi, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so it was really a nice overview about the global fiber optics market, as well as the focus being on the Asia Pacific. Thank you for your session. So we will now move to the discussion and Q&A part now. So to the audience again, if you have any queries or questions to any of the speakers for today, so just type those in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will try our best to discuss that with the speaker. So now we will move to the Q&A and discussion part. So based on Roland and Michael's presentation, I have some observations. So I am happy to discuss those with both of the speakers for today. My first question would be to Roland. The question would be like, does 5G deployment get a pause due to COVID scenario? Do you see anything, Roland?
Well, what we observed in terms of deployment, and as Michael mentioned, of course, there's been a slow at the beginning of the pandemic, because all the players were discovering the different restrictions and how to do. But I think now things are going better, because procedures are being adopted, and then technicians are formed to deploy in this pandemic area. So we see markets where things are recovering quite strong. So I really think that the bad story is under us, and then for the quarter to come, deployment will recover quite fast.
Okay. Again, another question to you. We saw that there are huge potential markets in Asia Pacific, like India, Bangladesh, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand. But their growth, some of them's growth are really high, but in terms of the penetration, it is not that much comparing to the other developed nations. So what do you think that they lack in terms of operations or regulations in those markets, which are actually dragging them behind?
Well, there is also in those Southeast market, I think a leading role to be taken by the government. We have seen in other parts of Asia digitalization plan happening in other countries. So for me, the government has also a key role to play in order to orchestrate the good deployment, maybe to push outside the dense area for some open access model, giving some subsidies when it is the case. So the government role is quite important in those countries, and also in front of this, regulation should be quite independent and strong to apply the different decision of the government. So for me, those two ingredients are key for the success of fiber in Southeast Asia.
I see. Thank you for the answer. So I will now ask some questions to Michael. Will we see any shift of production from China to other markets due to fresh Biden strategy and India-China row that is actually currently going on? Michael, please.
Yeah, thanks, Rusafi. So obviously I mentioned the stimulus measures, and it's a good point. And we've seen how strong the US market was last year, and how strong we expect it to be over the coming years. I certainly would like to point out that a lot is unknown at this stage regarding the infrastructure the stimulus measures, how much that's going to feed directly into fiber, and what the impact to demand will be. But it is looking certainly positive, and with exceptionally high growth rates forecast for that region, for the US, around the 10% level. Compare that to where we expect China to be over the midterm. We saw the midterm compound annual growth rate expectations are in the region of sort of 4 or 5% for China. So I mean, in essence, with the US looking to probably satisfy more of the domestic demand increases by themselves, with the likes of Corning and other domestic producers probably looking to capture that. I do expect, in terms of US share of global production to increase marginally. I don't think we're going to see a huge offshoring of production from China. I think, certainly with the capacity base that is built up there, the efficiency of the plants and the ability to produce on a big scale, we'll continue to see China to act as a major producer. But yes, there are going to be global variations, and I think that's more dependent on domestic demand, the outlook for domestic demand and developments in those respective countries.
Okay, great. Thank you for the answer. So another question I have from you towards you is that will the fiber price ever go up to 2017 or 2018 level? If you
Thanks, Rusafi. For me, you've frozen.
see any chance? When would that?
Rusafi, you're breaking up a tiny bit. I did get the question. I hope you can hear me. It's a really good question, and essentially, I think maybe I'll be a very rich man if I could very accurately predict that Unfortunately, my view is, and I hope this isn't overly pessimistic, it's just based on the data and what we're seeing, but I don't see prices getting back to that level, especially over the next 5, perhaps 7 years. Where we are in hopefully one of the charts at the end helped to better explain that, but where we are in terms of on a global basis, in terms of the available capacity or install capacity that we do have versus the outlook for fiber demand, even if fiber demand were to greatly outpace our CRU's expectations, I still don't think the gap between capacity and demand are going to close to a sufficient enough level to drive bare fiber prices up back to that 2017 sort of period where we're looking at $8-9 So now, of course, there are some variations. We're looking specifically at G652D in most of those price charts that I was showing. So, naturally, with a shift perhaps to more bended sensitive fibers and maybe the 657A2 grade, namely, we are going to see some variations. And when we look at the global cable market value by fiber type, we're going to see better growth or prospects from the A2 fiber types, which is going to help support the global cable market value. But if we're looking at 652D, Rusafi, I don't think we're going to get back to those levels, unfortunately, over the next 3-5 years.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for the answer. Am I audible now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think that there were some connection issues. So we will now take questions from our audience. I can see some of the questions started coming up. First question is from our friend Shoichi Hanatani. His question is to Roland, is that what is the driving factor to FTTH deployment in Vietnam? Roland, please.
Well, I think Vietnam is a good example for potential. First, because of the density of population in some parts of the country, and also because of no competition really with other platforms in the country. So we have seen already involvement in Vietnam, and I think this growth will be there. The role of the government also is key, as the government set up a plan or so for fiber rollout and adoption. So I think that Vietnam is in good tracks for the future of rollout, and already we have seen in the figures that today it is one of the leading markets in APAC region in terms of volume.
Okay, thank you for your answer. So I think the next question is again to Roland from our friend Anil. He asked that, do you see or expect a dip in FTTH rollout, at least in short term, when 5G comes in, which would give high speeds?
Well, for me, 5G is quite complementary to fiber adoption. We have seen this in other markets. The US is a good example. Well, you can use the fixed wireless access with 5G to target some zones where fiber will not be deployed today. And this can be a solution to wait for fiber. This is also applying in other markets in the world. So complementary, and then for me, 5G will be also a driver in terms of backhauling and front haul, maybe more in the years to come, when millimeter waves should be more deployed, and where densification of base station should happen.
Great, thank you. So I think the next question is again to Roland. It is regarding, it is from Bernard Lee, our colleague again. There seems to be pickup of 10G-PON systems, but do you see a pickup of 40G or even the IEEE's new 100G-PON?
Well, it is clear that XGS-PON and 10G-PON symmetric seems to be today quite successful especially in China, I would say. We see more in the future some uncertainty, I would say, on the choice of NG-PON. We see some example, for example, with Verizon adopting NG-PON 2, but being quite isolated, I would say, in terms of choice. For me, there is today two camps in terms of NG-PON. One camp is more on 25 GPON, but we see that today it is not standardized at the ITU. And the other camp is more on 50 GPON. So, well, the market will decide on this. For me, the clear driver is that the fiber in the future should be addressed not only to homes, but also for businesses, and also, of course, for linking base stations. So this technology should make operator to differentiate the traffic, and especially also there is a debate on short latency when fiber will be addressed for front haul in particular. So today, difficult to say what will be the choice in those two technology, but for sure 10 GPON is quite successful.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, I think the next question is to Michael from Milim. So as we see G652D fiber as well as preforms becoming commodity, do you see G657A/B now become future defaults in coming years?
Yeah, so our view at CRU is that there will be a pickup, certainly an ongoing shift to 657 over the coming years. You know, we're starting to see this right now. We know, you know, certain markets, it is, or has been over the years, individual countries' preference in terms of their deployment, in terms of what they're choosing. 657, France being a prime example. But I think there is ongoing need or a desire for the 657 types and more bend insensitive fiber types going forward, due to, you know, tighter spaces that we need to be fitting these cables into. And, you know, we see, I forget the exact numbers, but certainly quite a notable shift, probably starting from next year out to 2025 in terms of this balance. And like I said, that's going to help when we look at total cable market value, which is how some people assess the industry. You know, that's going to help that basis. If we're seeing, you know, a few percent increased pickup in 657 fiber types, naturally we're going to see a bigger boost to the cable market value compared to 652D. So yeah, I'd say it's dependent on individual carrier, their specifications, their requirements, but certainly we do see a pickup over time. Gathering pace, I'd say, probably as we head towards the 2023 to 2025 period as well.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So another question I got from Rafael, I think both can pick up by parts of it. So do you see in the market make a shift in the business models or business cases put in place or action to be able to execute new FTTX deployments? So is there any business models shift or business cases shift actually, which will actually be able to execute new games?
Well, on my side, as I was saying, there is differentiated approach if you're deploying on a high dense area, where here you can see a competition of platform, I would say, or players, or if you deploy in zones less dense, and there open access model could be a good solution in order to share the investment. We see this happening classically in many markets worldwide. So for me, it is today a quite clear strategy.
I think from my side, approaching it perhaps at a high level, but looking at the way we break down the market in terms of FTTX related cable demand and 5G or 4G related cable demand. Yeah, we've certainly seen a shift in the balance of the two, and essentially what we've done is upgrade our near-term expectations for FTTX related demand. You know, while this was on a global basis, had peaked in 2017 and on a gradual decline, mostly due to the completion of the rollouts in China, but we've certainly seen an upgrade to that as individual countries are now looking at shoring up their fixed line networks, focusing on improving FTTH access or FTTX access over the near term. And I think that has come at the cost of some 5G related plans to some extent, some marginal delays to that. So we've kind of seen a shift in near term demand drivers and relative upgrades or downgrades in each of FTTX and 5G. But that's all I can add on that side, Rusafi.
Okay, great. Thank you to both of you. So I think we have almost come to the end for today's session. We would like to thank both of the speakers for today who have actually spent a lot of time behind this webinar. I'd like to thank both of you on behalf of the FTTH Council Asia Pacific. And to the audience, we'd like to thank you as well for your time in this pandemic situation. We appreciate everyone's being here, even in the busy schedule or some other stuffs. We will keep our FIBERTalk webinar series initiative running, and our next week webinar is on the display. It will be on 12th May. Will be on Fiber in 5G. The registration is already live. The registration link will be shared with everyone in an hour with a follow-up email to everyone. So please also stay tuned to our social media pages in LinkedIn, website, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks again for joining us today. We will see you next time. So thanks to everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.